Imagine living without power for a whole month. No lights, no water, no heat, no internet for weeks on end.
A stark new warning from the Energy Department. According to new projections, Americans could face up to 800 hours of blackouts per year by 2030. That's more than a month without power, and it's raising some questions about the reliability of our electric grid.
Here's the hard truth. Our power usage is skyrocketing, driven by tons of new data centers for AI, the spike in electric vehicles, and the push towards more electric appliances.
We need double the electricity that we have, which is hard to believe. We need even more than that.
And he's right, but instead we're retiring almost 10% of our baseload power plants like natural gas, coal, hydro, nuclear over the next 4 years. Their replacements are mostly in the form of solar, which doesn't work at night, and wind, which doesn't blow on demand. And we don't have the storage capacity at scale to bridge those gaps. And that's why our grid still relies heavily on these baseload power plants that run 24/7. They keep the lights on when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, and that's what we're retiring. But power generation is only part of the problem. A power grid also has to transmit electricity wherever it's needed. The Department of Energy's own studies show that we need about 5,000 miles of new high-voltage lines every year just to keep up. But we've been falling hopelessly behind, less than 900 miles in 2024 and only 88 miles in 2023.
You can do a generation project in a year. The transmission 3 if you're lucky, but it can go over 10.
Another source says that on average it can take 10 years or more to build a high-voltage transmission line. Even if all power plant closures were canceled for the next 4 years, the Department of Energy still predicts that we'd have an average of 11 days of blackouts per year, over a week and a half each year. Right now, we average less than a half a day of power outages per year. So you can see why blackouts, longer than we've ever seen before, could become our new normal if we don't make some dramatic changes right away.
If you just think today about the world we live in and all of the creature comforts we have, you will recognize that essentially none of them would be there without electricity. It is the power source for almost everything out there. You can't communicate, the electrons don't flow in your car, the gasoline won't explode in the cylinders and you won't go down the road. So if you cut off the flow of electrons in our world today, it's just a whole different world. And the grid upon which we depend for almost everything is very vulnerable. It is just at the tipping point is the way that the experts will characterize it.
But our power grid isn't just strained, it's under attack. This grid wasn't built to withstand the world we're now living in. In 2024, there was a 42% increase in cyber attacks on U.S. energy in just 1 year. The FBI even released a statement that China's hackers are targeting American civilian critical infrastructure, pre-positioning to cause real-world harm to American citizens and communities in the event of a conflict.
How vulnerable is our power grid?
It's probably the most vulnerable thing we have.
But it's not just cyber attacks. Reuters reports that physical assaults on the grid have remained high since rising in 2022, with about 2,800 reports of gunfire, vandalism, and other strikes on electrical networks last year.
Early this morning, we toured the substation that was one of the sites of one of the attacks on December 3rd, leaving my home and 45,000 of my neighbors without power for, in some cases, almost a week.
Congressman Hudson is talking about the attack on 2 power substations in Moore County, North Carolina.
In the aftermath of this attack, our hospital was impacted, threatening medical treatment. Schools were shut down. Businesses were affected. Stoplights went dark. Gas stations were closed. Cell signal was impacted. Water couldn't be heated. Our region suffered millions of dollars in damage. It really made the hundreds of pounds of deer meat that I lost in my freezer seem pretty insignificant.
They didn't use sophisticated weapons, just simple rifle fire plunged 60% of Moore County into a blackout for almost a week. This same strategy nearly brought down the grid for Silicon Valley in 2013 when attackers took out the Metcalf substation with rifles. Thankfully, PG&E was able to divert power around this station and avoid a real catastrophe. John Wellinghoff was chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, known as FERC, and he also participated in the investigation.
If they had succeeded, what would have happened?
Could have brought down all of Silicon Valley.
We're talking Google, Apple, all these guys.
Yes, that's correct.
While these may seem like relatively small, isolated incidents, the experts say it only takes a few coordinated attacks in the right places to cripple our entire power grid.
It was actually a very shocking result to us that there's very few number of substations you need to take out in the entire United States to knock out the entire grid.
Knock out the entire grid?
That's correct.
How many would it take to knock out putting the entire country in a blackout?
Less than 20.
And he wasn't alone. In Congress, Roscoe Bartlett was one of the leading voices on grid security.
I am told that there are a dozen substations in the country that are so critical to the function of the grid that if terrorists took out those dozen substations, the grid would come down.
But the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission admitted our power grid is even more precarious when a secret report was leaked by the Wall Street Journal. The U.S. could suffer a coast-to-coast blackout if saboteurs knocked out just 9 of the country's 55,000 electric transmission substations on a scorching summer day. And when this critical equipment is destroyed, how long is it going to take to replace it?
We could have events in the future where the power grid will go down and it's not in any reasonable time coming back on. For instance, if when the power grid went down, some of our large transformers were destroyed, damaged beyond use. We don't make any of those in this country. They're made overseas, and you order one, and 18 months to 2 years later, they will deliver it. Our power grid is very vulnerable.
Let's talk transformers for a minute. We don't have enough transformers.
If some of their big transformers go down, 2-year turnaround to replace them.
But the worst case scenario for our power grid would be an EMP.
I think there were 9 members of Congress and 3 Russians and a personal representative of Slobodan Milosevic. We were sitting in a hotel room in Vienna, Austria in '99. We were there developing a framework agreement, which the G8 about a week later adopted to end the Kosovo conflict. The senior Russian there was Vladimir Lukin, who was the ambassador here. He was very angry. He sat in that hotel room, little short fellow with his arms folded over his chest looking at the ceiling for 2 days. And he said, you spit on us, now why should we help you? Because we had come to the Russians to help us with a negotiated settlement to the Kosovo conflict. And finally, after 2 days there, Vladimir Lukin spoke up. He said, if we really wanted to hurt you, with no fear of retaliation, we'd launch an SLBM, we'd shut down your communications and your grid for 6 months or so. The third-ranking communist was there, Alexander Shabanov, a tall, handsome, blonde Russian. And he smiled and said, and if one weapon won't do it, we have some spares. I think at that time they had something like 10,000 spares. What was he talking about? Something that would shut down our power grid, our communications for 6 months or so. And there'd be no fear of retaliation. SLBM, it's launched from the sea. Who would know where it came from if it was launched from the sea? He was talking, of course, about EMP, electromagnetic pulse.
EMP attacks are on the horizon and are potentially very damaging.
There is a phenomenon very well known to people who plan wars and build weapons that the average citizen may not know about, and that is called EMP. And this is electromagnetic pulse. It's produced various ways, but the most widespread pulse would be produced by a nuclear weapon detonated above the atmosphere. Our country has only one experience with that. This was in 1962, I believe it was, over Johnston Island, and we had an extra atmospheric burst. The weapon was detonated above the atmosphere, and this produced a surprising consequence. There was a huge flow of what today are called Compton electrons, and it was like a huge solar flare, orders of magnitude stronger than a solar flare, like really strong static electricity everywhere all at once. Another way of thinking about it is like a lightning strike everywhere. The Russian generals tell us that the Soviets, and I can quote this because this is in the public domain, it's not classified, tell us that the Soviets had developed an EMP weapon that produced 200 kilovolts per meter at the center. A weapon detonated 300 miles high above the United States would reach a line of sight the margins of our country, Florida and northwest Washington. And this would produce at the margins about 100 kilovolts per meter. If that's true, that is considerably more, I think, than anything that we designed and tested to during the Cold War when everybody was concerned about EMP. By the way, almost any country that has nuclear weapons in any war game, an EMP laydown is an early occurrence in that war game. And when the referee is there monitoring the war game, they just take their hand and wipe most of the assets off the table. Because what the EMP does is to, if it's strong enough, and 100 kilovolts per meter would be strong enough, it fries all microelectronics. That means there will be no more computers. Your car is full of them. There will be no more electricity. The only person you can talk to is the person next to you, unless you happen to be a ham operator with a vacuum tube set, which is 1,000,000 times less susceptible. The only way you can go anywhere is to walk, unless you happen to have a car that has a coil and condenser, and then you, of course, need to get some gasoline for your car. This would be a horrendous kind of an experience. I sponsored legislation that set up an EMP commission. I'm sure if you do a Google search, you can find this. It's the EMP commission. Our Pentagon is looking at all of their weapons systems. By the way, our military is very concerned about the power grid, and they are looking at what's called islanding because they get much of their power from the private sector. Now, they, like a hospital, they have some generators and some diesel, but that's only going to run for a little while. Then what do you do when that runs out? Because the grid could go down and stay down for a very long time.
And even if the nuclear threat never occurs, natural EMPs are created periodically from solar storms. And these can have a very damaging impact on the power grid, with its thousands of miles of power lines acting as antennas.
Solar storms are powerful and shoot out particles and radiation into the solar system. When directed towards Earth, geomagnetically induced currents can damage power grids, increase corrosion of pipelines, cause electrical transformer failures, and blackouts.
And it's not just theory. A government-commissioned report for Oak Ridge National Lab admits that today's sprawling high-voltage power grids are more susceptible to space weather impacts than ever before. Perhaps the largest storm we know of occurred in 1859. It's known as the Carrington event.
I guess it's been a couple of years or so ago now that Dr. McClellan was in my office. He is the head of the Office of Reliability in FERC. And he said that when we have the next Carrington event is a super solar storm. The last one occurred in 1859. There was not much electronics of any kind then. We had Morse code things. They caught on fire. This was a really big solar storm. A British scientist by the name of Dr. Carrington described the event, and so it's known by his name. It's not if, it's when there is another Carrington event. And Dr. McClellan said that the grid would come down. We would destroy or damage 300 of our big transformers. We don't make them. You order them and they will make them for you, and it takes, a year and a half, 2 years. He said the grid would be down from 2 to 4 years in the event of a major solar storm. That's not an if, that's a when, because there will be another major solar storm.
In 1989, a moderate solar storm caused the Hydro-Quebec blackout, which took down power for 6 million people.
The entire province had been hit by a power failure. People at Hydro-Quebec are not positive, but they think the blackout was caused by the sun.
Hydro-Quebec officials say they know how it happened, they're just not sure why. There was a sudden power surge in northern Quebec, just a fraction of a second. And then, like a big circuit breaker, the whole system shut down. They don't know, but they suspect it may have something to do with solar flares. Over the last week, scientists have recorded some of the largest flares this century. They send out a magnetic shower, which can interfere with transmission lines back on Earth, especially those at high latitudes.
Now keep in mind that as destructive as this solar storm was, they can be up to 10 times more powerful than that. And get this, the famous insurance company Lloyd's of London issued a report in 2013 on the solar storm risk to the North American electric grid. It says a Carrington-level extreme geomagnetic storm is almost inevitable in the future. Historical auroral records suggest a return period of 50 years for Quebec-level storms and 150 years for very extreme storms such as the Carrington event that occurred 154 years ago. Make that 166 years as of now. It goes on to say that the total U.S. population at risk of extended power outage from a Carrington-level storm is between 20 to 40 million, with durations of 16 days to 1 to 2 years. But space weather is just the start. In reality, 80% of our current power outages come from storms here on the Earth.
The U.S. electrical grid is under strain. Large, sustained outages have happened with increasing frequency in the U.S. over the past 2 decades, according to a Wall Street Journal review of federal data, driven largely by weather-related problems.
And the Energy Department says the average annual number of weather-related power outages has increased by almost 80% since 2011. That almost sounds biblical, doesn't it? Because it is. In Matthew 24, Jesus said there would be wars, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places. Haven't we seen that? Storms, disasters, and crises hitting harder and more often. But then Jesus goes on to say, but the end is not yet. These disasters are serious, but they aren't the final crisis. The Bible tells us what the real end-time issue will be, and it's about control, controlling people's bodies and minds. Revelation says that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. In other words, if you stand up for God and his law, you're going to be banned from the economy until you're starved into submission. Now imagine if that started today. What would you do for water if you couldn't buy it from the water authority? Even most wells can't operate without electricity. That means no drinking, often no cooking, no flushing toilets, no clean water, or your food. Everything in your fridge and freezer spoils without power, and in most cases you can't even cook without electricity. Even most gas ovens won't work without power. Your heat? Most systems can't function without electricity. Picture your home this winter, dark, cold, and silent. Now can you see what's happened? Power itself isn't a basic necessity, but we've made ourselves so dependent on it that food, water, cooking, and heat don't work without it. That dependency plays right into the enemy's plan of control. But God doesn't want his people trapped like this. That's why he warned us. And it makes me think of Jeremiah weeping over his nation when they lost independence. In Lamentations 5, he cried, "We pay for the water we drink, and our wood comes at a price. We have given our hand to the Egyptians and the Assyrians to be satisfied with bread." Jeremiah recognized the catastrophe of becoming dependent on their enemies for life's most basic necessities. They were paying for their water. Their wood came at a price. In other words, their ability to heat their homes and cook their food. And they stretched out their hand to the Egyptians and the Assyrians for bread. But a sobering thought hits me. How many of us are paying for our water, either to the water authority or to the power company for the ability to pump from a well? And what about our wood? Do we pay a price for the ability to heat our homes and cook our food? And how many of us are depending on huge entities that don't care about us for our family's food? Putting out our hand to the Egyptians and the Assyrians to be satisfied with bread. At least Jeremiah understood how bad this was and was weeping about it, but sadly, most folks today haven't even given it a second thought. Whatever's most convenient is what's done. The Apostle Paul warned Timothy about this. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So yes, providing for your family's physical needs is a sacred responsibility, and there's coming a time when just bringing home a paycheck and buying everything isn't going to be possible. So what's the answer? Just stick our heads in the sand and hope the grid holds together? Or try and survive through a month of blackouts every year? The Department of Energy has suggested that communities form local microgrids with solar, wind, batteries, or whatever, so they can keep running even if the regional grids collapse. That's a great idea, but when was the last time your neighborhood voted to spend big money on preparedness, or really anything for that matter? And then there's the time it takes to get through municipal red tape and hurdles. Trust me, it's not going to happen anytime soon for most of us. So here's the better option. Take that same concept and shrink it down. Your own microgrid, a grid of one. No bureaucracy, no waiting, just your family on the grid when everything's normal, but when it crashes, your lights are still on. What a great idea. It's kind of an American thing to take responsibility for our family rather than depending on the government or huge corporations to do it for us. And right now you can save 30% on the cost thanks to the federal solar tax credit. It's a true credit, not just a deduction, but here's the catch. It expires December 31, 2025. And that's why this Blackout-Proof series exists, to show you step by step how to build a backup power system that fits your home, fits your budget, and gets installed on time to claim that credit and keep your lights on. So here's your first step. Go to getblackoutproof.com and use our free backup power tool. In just a couple of minutes, we'll help you discover what kind of system is the right fit for you and where to begin, even if you don't know anything about power systems. And we'll also keep you in the loop on upcoming videos or resources that are released with this series so you don't miss a thing. Just remember, this isn't just about comfort, it's about survival, it's about freedom, and it's about time. Okay, friends, keep an eye out for video 2, where we'll get into the nitty-gritty of what your options are for getting your home set up with backup power.